All right, abortion is mentioned 199 times throughout Project 2025, not just in one section. The foreword, by the way, reads in part, quote, "The Dobbs decision is just the beginning. Conservatives in the states and in Washington, including the next conservative administration, should push as hard as possible to protect the unborn in every jurisdiction in America," end quote. That's in the foreword. Project 2025 suggests that the Department of Health and Human Services should instead be known as the Department of Life, and its recommendations target every single aspect of reproductive health care. Let's start with medication abortion. The mandate reads, quote, "Abortion pills pose the single greatest threat to unborn children in a post-Roe world. FDA should therefore reverse its approval of chemical abortion drugs because the politicized approval process was illegal from the start," end quote. It's not just the medication mifepristone that they're after. Project 2025 also aims to eliminate both the morning after pill, which is emergency birth control, and men's contraceptives from Affordable Care Act coverage. On page 458, the mandate also suggests cracking down on what the document refers to as, quote, "mail order abortion," which would entail using the 1870s-era Comstock Act to prosecute people who send abortion pills or potentially anything affiliated with abortion, like other medical supplies, in the mail. Page 455, Project 2025 aims to curb what it calls abortion tourism, instances in which women must travel to other states to seek medical care that is banned in their home state. It recommends that the CDC implement mandatory data collection for all abortions nationwide. That means literally tracking and surveilling women who choose to get abortions while threatening to cut funding to any state that resists that surveillance. The mandate also spells out the specifics around emergency intervention, stating that emergency rooms have a legal obligation to protect the life of the fetus. It reads, quote, "EMTALA, or the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, requires no abortions, preempts no pro-life state laws, and explicitly requires stabilization of the unborn child," end quote. In other words, Project 2025 says that in an emergency situation when an abortion would save the life of the pregnant person, medical personnel are not required to perform that life-saving abortion. And I want to be clear to you about this. You may see claims that Project 2025 is taking a more moderate stance on abortion. You may hear that Project 2025 doesn't call for a national abortion ban, that it calls for the differentiation between miscarriage, ectopic pregnancies, and elective abortion. But don't be fooled. Project 2025 section on the Department of Health and Human Services reads in part, quote, "The Secretary should pursue a robust agenda to protect the fundamental right to life. From the moment of conception, every human being possesses inherent dignity and worth. Abortion and euthanasia are not health care." Underwriting all of the draconian measures that I just listed and littered through the 900-page Project 2025 mandate for leadership is the repeated declaration that life begins at conception, an idea also known as fetal personhood. Fetal personhood insists that from the moment of conception, a fertilized egg, or a zygote, is a person with the same rights that you and I have. And that's what's at the heart of everything else that I've listed here, like banning abortion bills, banning funding for morning after pills, prohibiting doctors from performing abortions, even when doing so would save the life of a pregnant patient. Laws that establish fetal personhood, laws that say that doctors have the legal requirement to treat fetuses even when the pregnant person's life is at risk. In practice, those laws are abortion bans. Full stop. Any policy that declares life begins at conception is an abortion ban for all intents and purposes and will result in practice in miscarriage patients being denied care that is needed to save their lives. And that's not a guess. That's a fact. We're living in a post-Roe country now, and we've seen it happen over and over again. Right now, abortion is banned in 21 states. 14 of those have total bans in place. There are varying exceptions depending on where you are. States like Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Mississippi, for instance, claim to allow exceptions to their abortion bans to save the life of the mother, but not to save the health of the mother. So doctors are put in these impossible positions, legally unable to perform an abortion, a necessary medical procedure, and forced to watch patients become sicker and sicker until they reach death's door before they can move forward with an abortion or risk losing their licenses or their liberty. Women who are miscarrying very often need abortions to save their lives, their health, and their future fertility. Take the case of Amanda Zarowski, a Texas woman who was miscarrying her planned and wanted pregnancy. She developed a condition that meant that her fetus was not going to survive. The standard medical procedure for her condition was to terminate the pregnancy via D&C, an abortion. Without an abortion, Amanda was at risk of developing a serious and potentially fatal infection. But her doctors say they couldn't perform an abortion under Texas law because her non-viable fetus still had a heartbeat. She was told she wasn't sick enough. She'd have to wait. Days later, Amanda developed the infection that she was warned she may get. She went into septic shock. Her doctors finally performed the abortion, but Amanda's uterus and fallopian tubes were severely scarred. One fallopian tube is permanently blocked. Amanda sued the state of Texas in a suit that grew to include 20 women, many of whom experienced life or health-threatening complications. Earlier this summer, the Texas Supreme Court ruled against Amanda and the other women. That's what exceptions look like. That's the reality of extreme abortion bans. That's the reality of living under governments that push fetal personhood. And that is the plan under Project 2025. They say so clearly. The Dobbs decision is just the beginning. Joining me now, Michelle Goodwin, law professor at Georgetown Law School, host of the podcast On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin, and author of multiple important books, including Policing the Womb, Invisible Women, and the Criminalization of Motherhood. Michelle, thank you for being with us. In the chapter on the Department of Health and Human Services, Project 2025 reads, quote, HHS should return to being known as the Department of Life by explicitly rejecting the notion that abortion is health care and by restoring its mission statement under the strategic plan and elsewhere to include furthering the health and well-being of all Americans from conception to natural death, end quote. Tell me what that is meant to mean. What is that code for? What does it mean to the notion of abortion as health care?
The first thing to understand is that Project 2025 is about dismantling democracy. And the second thing is to think about it as the Dobbs decision and abortion being the first and primary wedge of that. This is all about personhood. This is all about dismantling the autonomy of women and their constitutional liberties and instantiating those liberties in embryos and fetuses. And it's important to note that that's quite distinct from the United States Constitution, which does not mention embryos or fetuses, but does say that citizens of the United States are people that are born. That's in the first sentence of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution.
One of the things that Donald Trump has tried to do is distance himself from this. He does it on Truth Social. He does it in his speeches. He says his view of abortion is much simpler. He just wants to hand it back to the states. Tell me why. I mean, obviously, he's doing that for political reasons, but we just saw that map. It doesn't actually work.
Well, we know that that's not true because in the lead up to the 2016 election, he said that he wanted to criminalize women. He wanted to ban abortion. He said that he would place people and, judges in the federal bench, including on the Supreme Court, that would carry out this agenda after the appointments of Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett. He then praised their work in dismantling abortion rights. He took credit for that. He very well knew what would be taking shape with this. He's been in close communication with those who have drafted this. And this has been a playbook. And one could say that this is a playbook that has been quite extensively used already by those who are legislating at the state level and even potentially by members of the United States Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's a good point. You don't have to go far. You can look at a number of states and just look at them and say, that's how it's going to turn out, except it's going to turn out for all of us around the country that way. Michelle, thanks as always. Michelle Goodwin is a co-faculty director of the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law at Georgetown Law and author of Policing the Womb, Invisible Women, and the Criminalization of Motherhood.